Today on CityCast Philly, it's the Friday News Roundup. We're talking mayoral candidate endorsements, a voter survey with some surprising results, and is Jeff Brown code switching? It's Friday, April 7th. I'm Abby Fritz, filling in for Trinae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Denise Clay-Marie, co-host of the Hall Monitor and CityCast Philly political contributor, thanks for being on the FNR with me.
Oh, no problem.
So before we hop into the week's news, I am so excited that the weather has been so nice. I've been taking, little walks in my neighborhood and enjoying all the blooming flowers. And I think this weekend I'm going to try to hit the Wissahickon for a nice little hike.
Oh, wow.
Sounds nice, right? Is there
Yeah.
anything you want to do this weekend, Denise, outdoors or otherwise?
Well, in fact, today I'm going to be heading to Citizens Bank Park to check out the Phillies, an opening day. And it's a chance to, sit outside, see the ballpark and just do something that's not necessarily related to politics, where I
Yeah.
spend a lot of time. So, yeah, so I'm looking forward to it.
And there is a lot going on in politics right now, as you've mentioned, Denise. So that leads us perfectly into the first thing we wanted to talk about, which is a mayoral forum that you moderated this week. Do you want to give us some of the highlights?
Well, I moderated a mayoral forum that was put together by Philadelphia City Councilman Kenyatta Johnson. And the focus of the forum, like the focus of many of the forums that we've had in this election cycle, was on public safety. And what made this forum, in particular different is the fact that the people asking the questions were community groups that were dealing with the issues of gun violence and the city's murder rate, on the front lines. They specifically touched on things like, what are you going to do about trauma, and the trauma that's associated with someone being a victim of gun violence? And what are you going to do in terms of, finding stuff for our kids to do that keeps them off the street? So it was interesting in that way. Another thing that kind of stood out about it for me, as particularly as a moderator, is like the last question came from the audience, and one of the audience members had a 7-year-old daughter who lost her father to gun violence about 18 months ago. The case is still unsolved. And the little girl came and asked a question of the mayoral candidates about what they were going to do in terms of her father's death. And there wasn't a dry eye in the House, including mine.
Did any of the candidates, I know you've been to a lot of these forums, you've moderated a lot of these forums. Did any of the candidates say anything that surprised you? Was there any approaches to some of these problems that, made you think, wow, that's a good idea? Or was it kind of what you expected?
Well, one of the problems that I'm having with the fact that we can basically, go to a forum every night if you want to, is the fact that you're still trying to ask these questions and get in-depth answers from a group of people that can be anywhere from 8 to 10, depending on the given forum.
Yeah.
I think that with the number of candidates that we currently have, it's hard to get in-depth answers to some of these questions. My hope is that at some point, the folks that organize these forums take a look at the polls before they start inviting people to the forums and start, whittling it down that way. But I'm not even sure that's going to happen.
Yeah. Speaking of polls, a poll recently came out by the Black Leadership PAC. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Okay. Well, the poll came from HIT Strategies, and they polled 400 Black Philadelphia voters between March 4th and March 16th which means this is a relatively recent poll.
Yeah.
It included a 100 person oversampling of people who make between $50,000 and $100,000 a year. It focused a lot on the middle class.
Mm.
One of the things this poll found is that 9 in 10 Black Philadelphia voters say that they believe that their vote is very or somewhat powerful when it comes to making changes to issues that matter to them. And Philadelphians rate the power of their vote
Mm.
higher than Black voters nationally. Black voters nationally, 53% think that their vote is really powerful. In Philadelphia, it's 89%. Now, what makes that interesting in terms of this particular poll is because the oversampling of the middle class, the people who make $50,000 to $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
One of the things that we are working on in Hall Monitor about the mayor's race is we're looking at how poverty affects voting.
Hmm.
What are the people who are in the most impoverished places in Philadelphia? What is voter turnout looking like there? And how maybe we
Mm.
can get them to catch up with the middle class in terms of understanding that their power is in the vote.
Absolutely. So, Denise, what do you think was the most surprising finding from this poll?
What I found interesting about that poll is the fact that 42% of Philadelphia's Black community is still undecided on a candidate,
Hmm.
and we don't have a whole lot of time before the May 16th primary. When Jim Kenney ran 8 years ago, for mayor, he had gotten enough endorsements to where you kind of knew that that was who people wanted. And
Hmm.
one of the more prominent endorsements he got came from a group that calls itself the Northwest Coalition. It was made up of a lot of people who are elected officials in the Northwest section of the city, and it's predominantly Black, and they all put their weight behind Jim Kenney, which led him to the mayor's office.
Hmm.
A lot of the Northwest Coalition right now is coalescing around Sherelle Parker, who was a member of that group.
Mm.
The fact that there is still 42% of the Black community that hasn't decided who they want to be the mayor yet, and there are at least 4 Black candidates running,
Hmm.
it is really significant.
Absolutely. And you'll have an article that's out today, right?
Yes. On this poll, it's going to be on the Hall Monitor newsletter, and we'll include the link.
Absolutely. I also know Ernest Owens wrote a story called The Problem with Jeff Brown's Racial Code Switching for Philadelphia Magazine. Let's talk about that.
Well, I don't know how much Jeff Brown has been paying his media operation in this race,
Yeah.
but if he's paying them $5, he might be getting ripped off. And the reason I
Oh,
say
man.
that is because this is like the third time that he has said or done something when it comes to the Black community that has been the equivalent of him sticking his foot in his mouth. He was at a candidates forum at one of the many that we have here in the city,
Hmm.
and he said something to the effect that if you knew what the candidates had done in the city's name in terms of corruption, that you would lynch them.
Wow.
That is something you do not say in a majority Black city. You really don't, because lynching has a very specific connotation to us.
Yeah. Well, and especially with other candidates that are also like many of the other candidates are also
Right,
black. So it's just that implication is not
right.
okay.
I remember looking at this video and I'm like, dude, what are you doing?
Um,
And I have friends who are like really, really close to him that really like him as a
mm,
candidate, and have been kind of mad at me because of some of the questions I've asked. But I have been telling them one thing consistently since he started running, which is there is a certain amount of patronization that he tends to do with Black audiences.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain amount of condescension that comes off. And I've heard this not only from, my sources on the street, but I've seen it up close.
Yeah.
If he is serious about winning this race, he needs to tone that down, because eventually, and it's starting to happen a little bit now, eventually folks are going to say, I no longer trust you. And I don't want you to be my mayor. And,
Yeah.
like I said, he has most of his grocery stores in places that are food deserts and that people really, need to have access to healthy food. And, you know, one thing that you can count on certain segments of communities of color to do is boycott.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope it doesn't come down to that because of how he has run this mayoral campaign. But he's nearing the point where it might be too late for him to clean up, to have that cleanup on aisle 4 if he keeps doing stuff like this,
Mm-hmm.
throughout the campaign. So I'm hoping that, he's reading all of this press that he's getting about this and saying, maybe I need to revise some things.
Yeah. And speaking of the mayor's race, fundraising numbers came out on Wednesday. What are we looking at with all these numbers that have just come out?
Well, the thing that everyone needs to keep an eye on is the cash on hand. Like I said, there's not too many weeks left before we have before we vote in the primaries. So you're going to start seeing a lot more TV ads, and
Mm-hmm.
you're going to start seeing, a lot more of that kind of thing. And what yesterday, what we saw when those numbers came out is, who can afford to do TV and who can't. And none of those numbers included what's coming in from political action committees and other in-kind contributions. But what the number that stood out most to me was former city councilman Alan Dom.
Mm-hmm.
He put $2 million of his own money into the mayor's race.
Mm-hmm.
And you've either got to be really confident in yourself to say, I'm going to take $2 million of my own money, $7 million altogether, because he had already put in $5 million,
Yeah.
and I'm going to run for this office. But then when you find out that Alan Dom is worth roughly $400 million, you
Mm.
realize that, this is basically his petty cash.
Yeah, it's his change, pocket change.
That's what he shakes out, from his sofa cushions. Another thing that stood out, and it came from Rebecca Reinhardt's finance report, because I look as much at what you spend the money on as how much money you raised. She raised, over $1 million, but
Mm-hmm.
she gave 55,000 of it to John Street as consultancy fees. And personally, I want to know, you know, what what's that going to? What advice is he giving you? And it also becomes kind of funny when you look at the fact that the television commercial that she has running right now is a commercial where you have John Street and Michael Nutter, both former mayors, endorsing her simultaneously. Now, anybody who was there for Nutter's campaign for mayor back in 2008 knows that he and John Street do not like each other
Mm-hmm.
at all. In fact, when Jim Kenney was inaugurated, a friend of mine that was working for the city as a photographer was trying to get all of the living mayors in one picture, for history and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than take that picture and have to stand next to Michael Nutter, John Street left the building.
Oh
Not
my
just
gosh.
the room, he
Oh my
left the
gosh.
building.
Wow.
And it was just fascinating to watch for all of us. So seeing these two men in this commercial together is just like, we're like, okay, how did she pull that
Yeah,
off?
move mountains.
And
They've done some mediations. That's part of.
yeah, the person who mediated that dispute should probably be contracted to handle all contract disputes in the world
Oh, man.
forever because they've got the secret sauce.
They can be mayor. That's who we need, mayor. Yep.
They should be mayor.
Yep.
Because, man.
Wow. So much mayor talk, Denise. Let's end with some good news. What made you smile this week?
It actually these days a lot makes me smile because I'm at the point where I'm like, if I don't allow that to myself, particularly covering politics, I will turn into a person that no one wants to be around.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to allow that for yourself. And my hope is that everybody takes what's going to be a very nice weekend, Easter Sunday and stuff, and actually, spend some time hanging out. The Easter parade is on South Street on Sunday. And that's always interesting because you have, people in their Sunday best, people putting their dogs in their Sunday best and walking them. And it's all very cool. So I'm hoping that everybody takes a few minutes to go out and do something fun for yourself. Practice some serious self-care because as the mayoral primary gets closer to coming, as we get closer to May 16th, you're going to need it.
Yep. Get out and vote. Definitely. Well, Denise Clay Murray, co-host of the Hall Monitor and CityCast Philly political contributor, it's so nice to have you back.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be back.
The last day to register to vote in the primaries is May 1st. Be sure to come out and vote on May 16th. It's time for the tip of the day, where we share a life hack for living in Philly. This is your sign to swap out that old, tattered SEPTA key card you've been holding on to for the last few years. I know you have it. If your card is expired, damaged, or you just want a new one, but don't want to lose those travel credits, there is a way. First, you have to register your card. You can do this by visiting septakey.org or by calling the customer call center at 1-855-567-3782. Once you do this, you can purchase a new key card, and then you have to register that one as well. Once both cards are registered, you can transfer credits between the cards on the SEPTA website. You can also delete inactive cards and set up auto load online. Look at that. You have a brand new SEPTA card now to get you all around the city. If you have a tip of the day, we'd love to hear from you too. Call or text us at 215-259-8170. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. The producers are me, Abby Fritz, Natalie Rivera, and Elizabeth Kama. Our Hey Philly newsletter editor is Brittany Valentine, and our host is Trinae Nuri. Music is by Philly's own Interminable, with additional music from All the Kimonos and James Weldon. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey Philly. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Have a great weekend and be safe. Bye.